Good morning, everybody. My name is Margaret Hinkle. I chair the Post Commission. Welcome to the members of the public who are attending, and welcome to the members of the Post staff who are attending. Let me begin, please, with a roll call. Commissioner Baker.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Bluestone.
I'm here. Good morning.
Commissioner Calderon.
Here, good morning, all.
Commissioner Crispin.
Good morning, I am here.
Commissioner Hall.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Kazarosian.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Talley.
Morning, present.
And we received notice that Commissioner Luma will be attending. She'll be joining us shortly. And I think with that, having called the meeting to order and taken a roll call of the commissioners, established that we have a quorum present, let me ask for a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting, the October 17th, 2024 meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
We ask for a vote. Commissioner Baker.
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone.
Yes.
Mr. Calderon.
Yes,
Commissioner Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Kazarosian.
Yes.
Commissioner Talley.
Yes.
And I also approve. And with that, let me turn to the Executive Director report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Let me start my report like I usually do with sharing my screen. Can everybody see the screen? Thank you. Madam Chair and Commissioners, I want to start my report today by mentioning some sad news that came to our attention. I'm referring to the sad passing of an officer that took place in recent days. Although there have been fallen officers since Post came into existence, and I may not have mentioned them here, I now believe that all fallen officers should be acknowledged in this setting. And it occurs that the beginning of my report is appropriate to do so. There are inherent hazards that come to this profession, and mentioning the names of fallen officers is a strong reminder of those hazards and the fact that we very much appreciate the work that all officers do. So sadly, Lieutenant Scott Carroll of the Malden Police Department passed on November 4th at the age of 56. We send our condolences to his family, the Malden Police Department, and his community at large. As I mentioned, we'll make it a practice to mention fallen officers like I just did, and I sincerely hope it is something that happens very, very frequently. On to my report. I will start with a brief update regarding the information that is due to Post and some of the compliance timing of such reports. I will then move to officer records and speak about an upcoming project, and that is we're planning to start collecting information on officers' letters of commendation. The purpose of that would be to include them in the public database. I will close my report with a brief update on the panel discussion that Post hosted almost a month ago. That is October 18, the day after our last meeting. This was an in-person panel discussion regarding physical health and fitness, which included national and international experts, and our legal team will also speak about some of those findings in their section. So on to the records that we collect. We continue our ongoing effort to process, analyze, close complaints and incident reports with the use of the portal. Most of those reports are being closed just as we envisioned. In other words, happening in real time as Post staff interacts with agencies several times using that portal. We, of course, also have ongoing conversations with agencies about troubleshooting and submitting information to the portal. As I have done in prior months, I'm reporting on the number of cases and agencies with open cases or complaints that are past due. In this particular slide, we have those that have cases that have more than 90 days since the submission of the initial incident, and the regulations provide that they need to report to complete the investigation within 90 days or ask post for an extension. As of last week, we only have 14 agencies with complaints in these categories, with a couple of exceptions. As you can see in the slide, 11 agencies have only one case pending, and that is, I'm here to tell you, a big improvement compared to the last few months. To put into context, this is a lower number compared to my prior report. This is a testament to the work that agencies are doing and have done in the recent past, but especially the great work that our team of intake coordinators is doing, just following up on all the complaints that get submitted to us, looking at the past due dates and interacting with agencies to remind them about the submission process. A key takeaway, in my view, is that only a handful of agencies have these cases pending. So a lot of agencies have gone up. For reference, this number was in the hundreds as of September of this year. That is the last time that I gave you my report. I might mention that there are a number of cases which have asked for an extension, and that investigation may still be pending. That is not included in this report, but our Division of Standards also actively monitors those cases and the reasons for those requests, again, in order to comply with the regulations. I'll move on to another area that we monitor with the help of the portal, and that is also the kind of analytics that I plan on reporting to you periodically. We can do these analytics with the help of all the data that comes and flows into the portal. The big finding here is that some agencies, but notably Boston PD, take a long time to impart discipline. This is a category of cases where the internal affairs investigation has been closed, or in other words, they include at least one sustained allegation, but where the discipline is pending. I might mention that in some, perhaps most of these instances, the officer might still be out on administrative leave, waiting for that discipline to be imparted. As per the figures that you see in this slide, there are 13 agencies with 56 cases where the case has been closed and the discipline is pending. Boston PD is the outlier and counts with more than half of those cases, followed by 4 agencies with a handful of cases and 8 other agencies with only 1 case. So Boston PD is an outlier, as I mentioned, both because of the number of cases and that fall in this category, but also the number of days, the average number of days that it takes since those incidents were submitted. For the case of Boston, that is 110 days, and I might mention counting because they are still pending. In other words, some of those cases may take longer. Where the average number of days for everyone else on all other cases amounts to 61 days combined. Again, I'm talking about averages. Now, I cannot speak with confidence as to what the specific reasons behind these metrics might be, but I suspect that in addition to a backlog of cases, there may be, and I want to stress the word maybe, instances where going through the process of arbitration might contribute to these times. I want to state that that should not be what might be driving this. Discipline, if the discipline is grieved or may later be reversed, there's a mechanism for agencies to reflect that in our portal, and we can correct or update the discipline where warranted. I think that's, again, something that we'll continue to monitor. We'll have active conversations, especially with Boston PD on this topic, in order to get to understand the root of the of these instances and why they're taking as long as they do. They should not. Let me move on to the project that I mentioned relative to letters of commendation. Commissioners will remember that staff initially focused on collecting disciplinary records, given the specific mandated deadlines in the statute. We then turned to publishing those records, given the great public interest regarding this information. In fact, we received and continue to receive multiple public records requests soon after we began to compile this information. So, notwithstanding all that focus on discipline, the regulations, which, by the way, I might mention, were promulgated after the initial collection of disciplinary records, also dictate that the public database contain letters of commendation awarded to officers. This, in our view, is consistent with the mission of POST, which is to enhance public confidence in law enforcement, and is also a balanced approach to reporting officers' records, not just the disciplinary records. So I should stress we don't currently have that information. We intend, however, to collect summary level information, just like we did for disciplinary records, in an efficient way. We want to leverage the lessons learned when collecting those records. You heard me give a lot of updates about data validation and things like that, but it is safe to say that we have a much more robust infrastructure now to collect new information, given that we have now a functioning portal that includes the reality that most agencies are comfortable and used to interacting with the portal. So the staff has embarked in internal discussions at this point as to the best way to develop functionality to collect that information, and we will continue to consult with agencies as to the best way to do that as we embark on collecting that information. Finally, I want to give a quick update on the physical health and fitness panel discussion that took place on October 18th. We convened a panel of national and international experts, including researchers in the area of physical fitness in law enforcement. Suffice to say that this is a topic that is of great interest across jurisdictions. One of the key takeaways for me is that I believe POST has a role in looking at ways to improve health and wellness for officers. We believe that the statute gives us a mandate to have such a role. Improving health and fitness is not just for the benefits of officers, I might argue, but also for the benefit of the public. There were multiple insights relative from this discussion, but there are two that I will mention here that really stayed with me. The first is that there are multiple instances of documented evidence that officers come to the profession in better health, physically better shape compared to the rest of the population. However, they leave the profession comparatively less physically fit compared to the rest of the population. And it's fair to say that a lot of it can be attributed to the hazard of the job. So simply maintaining officer health just the way they come in is perhaps a worthy goal. Another key insight from that discussion is that an officer who is or may feel less fit than the situation might require them to be is more likely to use force that's disproportionate to the situation, to what the situation might call. And therefore, the case for enhancing officer wellness is, in my opinion, a very strong one, and has the potential to, of course, directly benefit the public in the long run, all things being equal. Now, POST will not be able to make its own on its own any significant changes. Therefore, our approach should be collaborative, data-driven, and incremental. So I'm sure we will be discussing this topic on an ongoing basis. But we should look for ways to perhaps look at non-punitive way to incentivize or effectuate a better health, and that is again something that we'll continue to study and the best way to do that. Just want to thank Lizzie Smith and Joe Dula, who helped put together this panel. Lizzie, as you know, is our hearings administrator and a member of the legal department. And Joe is a faculty member with the Georgia Southern University Tactical Athlete Program and a subject matter expert in law enforcement officer physical testing. With that, I will pause here, commissioners, and ask to see if there are any questions or comments from commissioners.
I don't think I see any hands in the air. Thank you very much, Enrique, for that thorough report. And thanks also to all the members of the staff who have contributed to the matters that you have addressed. I think with that, we can move on to the next item in the agenda, which is the legal update. Randy, please.
Thank you very much. To begin, we have 3 updates concerning regulations. If it's all right with the chair, I will go through those 3 updates and then pause for any questions or comments on any of them.
Of course.
Thank you. The first update relates to one subsection of the Commission's regulations that concern the transmittal of complaints by law enforcement agencies to the Commission, and that's 555 CMR 1.01 subsection 1. The version originally published contained certain errors in formatting and punctuation that were not attributable to our agency or its counsel, and those errors made the regulations harder to follow. After several efforts over time, we were eventually able to get those corrected. The meeting packet includes a copy reflecting the changes in redlining, as well as the corrected version in its published form. And they are available on our website and on the main Commonwealth website, mass.gov. The second update concerns the regulations regarding the maintenance, reporting, and audits of law enforcement records and information, which the Commission voted to promulgate as 555 CMR 12 after taking into account public comments. Those regulations were published in the Massachusetts Register and became effective on November 8th, and they are available on our website and on mass.gov. The third update concerns the Municipal Police Training Committee's regulations regarding requirements for law enforcement officer training. Those are found at 550 CMR 3. And the update is that the MPTC is in the process of revising those regulations, and we thought that development would be of interest to the Commission and to others as a general matter, and in particular because the requirements for certification as a law enforcement officer include successful completion of the basic training program approved by the MPTC, because the Commission can take certain actions against an officer who fails to complete in-service training required by the MPTC, and because, as discussed at the last Commission meeting, the current working draft of our agency's revised recertification regulations would make the completion of in-service training a requirement for recertification. We will provide more information about the MPTC's revision process going forward so that the commissioners and others in our agency can offer input to the MPTC. So I will now pause to see if there are any questions or comments on any of those matters. Okay, if there are none, I can move on to the next matter in the legal update. So those matters involve the recertification process, and there are a few things that we'd like to raise with the Commission, picking up from the discussion at the last Commission meeting. The first matter relates to the certification requirement that an officer be of good moral character and fit for employment in law enforcement. On that matter, I will turn the floor over to Deputy General Counsel Pauline Nguyen.
Thanks, Randy. I will share my screen. That's showing up now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you and good morning, commissioners. For the character and fitness question, there are two policy questions that were presented at the last meeting and are before you today for further discussion. For the first one, the question before the commission is whether to use the term credible allegations or substantiated allegations when evaluating an officer's character and fitness. As context, in the regulations, there's a list of factors or standards that must be used when evaluating an officer's character and fitness, and that is on the screen before you. It includes items such as adherence to the law, demonstrating accountability and responsibility, and use of position. Then a subsequent section lists the types of information an agency may take into account when looking at these factors. There are about 25 or 26 things listed here. Information that can be considered include things like instances of misconduct or discipline, or mitigating factors such as awards and achievements. This list is intended to be non-exhaustive and demonstrates that such an evaluation requires a totality of the circumstances review that includes looking at both the positive and negative factors of an officer's history. The regulations make clear that no one factor is necessarily dispositive. Finally, before you are the definitions of the terms credible and substantiate to help with the discussion. The term credible appears in the regulations, requiring law enforcement agencies to submit to the Post Commission certain complaints, which the regulation makes clear are credible reports. We provide written guidance clarifying that a credible report is one that is capable of being believed by a reasonable person and is not based solely on speculation or conjecture. The term substantiate does not appear in the Commission's statute or regulations, so I pulled the definition from Black's Law Dictionary. It defines substantiate as to establish the existence or truth of, especially by competent evidence or to verify. And with that, I'll give the floor back to the chair for discussion or to have me present on the second policy decision at this time if you'd like.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Calderon, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I guess I would just reconfirm or restate my position within the subcommittee that law enforcement, whether it be members of the Chiefs Association, members of Maple, other organizations that made comments in our subcommittee meetings, as well as myself and the people that I represent, we would prefer the word substantiate. We believe that evidence should be as factual as possible and verified. Credible just does not exude equal treatment to those involved. Police officers, although we're held to a higher standard, should not water down that standard by using the definition of credible. Credible being a reasonable person, which I do agree with, but my reasonableness, in my opinion, may differ for others. So when we're judging police officers, wholeheartedly, we want that to be as factual as possible. We want that to be verified, and that means substantiated is a better criteria to use.
Thank you. Commissioner Kesrosian, please.
I try to unmute. Yeah, and I guess I'll just reiterate again. I think we have to separate and understand that this is not a dispositive standard. This is something that allows an investigation or further information to come forward. So this isn't something where there's going to be a final decision based on a credible or even substantiated complaint. This is something that allows the process to go forward so that we can gather more information and gather substantiating information or whatever you need. This is also not just a reasonable person standard, because it's also, when you look at the definition of credible, it says it's not based solely on speculation or conjecture. So there's a very clear definition of that. When you get to substantiated, you're talking about information that has to come in after a process goes, which is verification. Now that brings up or conjures up a notion of some kind of additional witness or corroboration evidence, and that's just not practical in many, many situations. And I think I had talked about this before. You have situations where people make a complaint and then it's not taken seriously or taken any further because agencies have in the past, and I've experienced this myself, required the person to come down and testify or have a in-person interview, for example, with the Internal Affairs. And that's very chilling. So I think I would stand by my position that I think credible covers everything. We're not making any decisions on certification or decertification based on a complaint, credible or substantiated. That process happens afterwards. This gives us the right to continue to investigate and get more information.
Thank you, Commissioner Kazarosian. Comments or questions from others of the commissioners?
So if I could just weigh in just briefly on the two standards. While I agree to some extent with Commissioner Kazarosian, I think if somebody has been mistreated or finds themselves in a position where they need to file a complaint against a police officer, I know most agencies now, above and beyond an in-person interview, allow for some kind of telephone interview or Zoom or something of the sort. So to the extent that the person may be credible, I think oftentimes people who initially appear as being credible need to be asked additional questions to determine their credibility. So I think I would weigh in on the substantiated definition, just because sometimes people do appear to be credible, and then they present well, then they're asked questions, and we determine that what initially appeared to be credible doesn't pan out that way.
Thank you, Commissioner Crispin. Commissioner Hall, please.
Yes, I just want to follow up, and I think about credible and that there would be further investigation. I'm thinking about victims of certain crimes also, like sexual assault and domestic violence, that find it intimidating and hard, and stories may change, not because the stories aren't true, just because of the circumstances. And so to meet another standard for a process that's already challenging for certain groups of people who don't necessarily see certain systems or the police as their friend, we wouldn't want to intimidate them further. And that's just, I've heard this personally, be further intimidated by processes or a legal justice system that they already find maybe not as friendly, warm, or trauma informed. And so again, it's credible. It's not anybody just coming up and saying this is the case. It's what a reasonable person would find credible. And also, I imagine that, or what would be the case, is there's further investigation. So I would be in favor of credible. Those are my comments. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker, please.
Yes, I just want to add, I think Commissioner Crispin nailed the comments. Most departments, you can make a complaint anonymously. You don't necessarily have to come in. And to the commissioner's point that was just made, yes, there are some people that are uncomfortable with the police. There are some people that may be nervous, but at the end of it, no matter what your feelings are, we have to ask questions to this complaint. We just can't take a blind complaint, even when we take it anonymously, and we're not going to use your name or et cetera, but we have to ask questions and verify. So I think Commissioner Crispin points were dead on. That's all I'd like to add.
Thank you. And the record should now reflect that Commissioner Luma has joined us. And I think with that, Commissioner Kazarosian, back to you, please.
Thank you. I'm not sure where this notion is coming. If someone makes a blind complaint, there's not gonna be any further questioning necessary. The credible complaint is what we're saying starts a process to get the information. The credible complaint doesn't start the process of decertifying an officer or anything else. The credible complaint is what starts what we're saying should be the basis to start the process, to ask more questions, to get more information, to get substantiation. If we start the process with substantiation, you're gonna cut out a large number of potential relevant substantiable or substantiatable, I'm not sure of the word, complaints, and I think that's a tremendous mistake.
Commissioner Calderon, do you have? Yes, I'm sorry, your hand is also up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As respectfully as possible, I disagree with one of the last statements. When we talk about credible or substantiated, they absolutely do start the process, and that process can lead up to and including decertification. So I'm looking at fundamental fairness is how I'm trying to present this. I ask everybody and all the commissioners or anybody in the audience, how would you want to be treated if you were the subject of a complaint? Would you like it to be just a credible complaint that someone taking the complaint, a reasonable person, of course, in their judgment, gets to decide whether or not it's credible? Or do we want a verified complaint to start a process that could lead up and into decertification? I think it needs to be more than just credible. I'll back the chief up as the chief is correct, not only his department, but I know here in Boston and I know within the Commonwealth, all departments take anonymous complaints and they need to be followed up and asked questions. And so many of them end up going unfounded for one reason or another. I'm sure some of them are fake. I'm sure some of the people are intimidated. I do understand that, but that's where the hierarchy of professionalism in police departments takes over. And the departments need to do their job to make sure that, hey, if they can verify and find something factual to go on, then they continue their investigation. But just one person's opinion as to whether it's credible or not does not seem fundamentally fair. And that's what I want to keep pointing out. It just seems to me that it's too open-ended when you talk about something being credible. There's just too much leeway on one person's opinion. It's just too subjective. So I appreciate being heard again.
Thank you. And Commissioner Crispin, again, please.
Yes, again, I don't want this to appear as if it's split between law enforcement and non-law enforcement. I clearly understand the points that were raised by Commissioner Hall and Commissioner Kazarojian. The system hasn't always worked in the way that it should. We can all acknowledge that. But I think there have been a lot of measures put in place to ensure that everybody who comes and presents a complaint to any police department, that person is heard. Whether it's in Boston, we have OPAT or directly to Internal Affairs, and oftentimes to OPAT. So I think there's enough measures in place to ensure that all complaints are validated and investigated and a determination is made. But I also think about the other side. I think to the extent that I know on my end, when I was in charge of internal affairs, there were oftentimes people, initially I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, this really happened. And then we start to ask questions or we show video and the credibility of their complaint is quickly dismissed. So for that reason, I think there are enough measures in place that we don't need to just take it on the credibility of the person, right? Whether or not we think that person is credible, there is still going to be an investigation that's going to be vetted and we'll come to a conclusion. So for that reason, I think we still need a substantiated definition.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone, please.
Yeah, I just would like to reiterate, I mean, I have tremendous concern also about potential bias towards police officers in cases where complaints aren't credible. But in this particular case, I think that we're looking at complaints that may be considered and are not required to be considered. And I view this as more of an issue of false positive versus false negative. So for instance, if we allow the inclusion of complaints that may turn out not to be substantiated, the process goes forward even though those complaints may not be valid. If, however, we exclude those complaints and they later turn out to be substantiated, then we have held on to an officer that may be impaired and we have not allowed that review process to occur. So I look at it more statistically and scientifically in that respect, and would encourage us to think about the impact of the false negative case scenario.
Thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Luma, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Do you have any comment on this particular issue for the other commissioners?
Yeah, I guess my perspective is I want to ensure that there's a vehicle for the public, and I think oftentimes it's hard to substantiate the complaints that may be coming from the public. So I guess I would want to hear from my fellow commissioners who are in law enforcement. Do we think that there's a vehicle that addresses the public concerns or complaints as diligently as you would say an officer who was facing an internal investigation that had a complaint that was filed due to performance on the job that came internally? I want to make sure that we're considering that.
Thank you. Let me now inquire of Pauline and Randy, what were you anticipating we would do today with this particular issue?
It would be helpful if the commission could vote on this issue today, but I defer to you, Chair, if that's possible.
It strikes me that the commissioners are quite split on this issue. I'm trying to figure out whether there's some way to proceed. Could we find another word? Could we combine the two? And I know I'm sorry, Enrique, did you just want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to mention perhaps something that was mentioned in the last meeting. Two points that were mentioned. There was ample discussion at the subcommittee level on this topic, and the subcommittee, itself came to the conclusion that it needed to be discussed at the commission meeting, and that was the genesis of the last commission meeting and the genesis of having this discussion, trying to resolve it, in this setting. In our opinion, I think ultimately a vote is what dictates the outcome. Split votes happen all the time. But if you feel, commissioners, chair, that you're not ready or informed, we can continue to try to tackle this in other ways. But we do feel that we provided as much context as necessary. We continue to do that if commissioners are ready for whenever they're comfortable.
Thank you, Enrique. Commissioner Kazarosian, please.
Thank you. I'm just thinking when you had suggested another word, I mean, I'm just to throw out here, the potential compromise words might be trustworthy or reliable. When we're talking about complaints, rather than credible or sustainable, because, or even, I'm not sustainable might even be a possibility, because that suggests a little higher level, but not quite as high as substantiated, because substantiated suggests that something more has to be done before anyone can go to the point where you get more information to then substantiate. So if we say, okay, this is a reliable complaint, this is a sustainable complaint, this is a trustworthy complaint, and again, just to comment on what has been said before. It's not just one person making this determination. You're talking about the police department or whoever looking at the information to decide, should we go further to investigate this? And again, I would urge sustainable, I don't believe is appropriate. I think that cuts off a tremendous number of potential reliable, I'm sorry, I don't mean sustainable, I mean substantiated. Sustainable may very well work, because then whoever's reviewing it may say, okay, I've got information, it sounds right, this sounds credible, but we're gonna need some more. I believe it's sustainable. At some point, it may not be, but I mean, you've got to start the process. So those are some other possible terms we could use if that's something you want to consider.
Thank you. I'm not sure who first put his hand in the air. Enrique?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just mention a couple of things. Substantiated somehow got into this discussion, but there's also in the disciplinary records that we've seen another term that is used quite a bit, which is the notion of sustained or unsustained. That the discussion from the past subcommittee meeting is that may be actually too late, to Commissioner Casarossian's point about what is being considered in this setting. This is a May, it's not dispositive, and it's part of the whole packet. I will mention something else that was discussed at the last commission meeting, and that is the notion of a trend. It was slightly alluded to here in this discussion, but where there may be multiple credible complaints where they have not been or yet substantiated is something that may factor into your calculation, commissioners.
Thank you, Enrique. Commissioner Calderon, are you next, or and then Commissioner?
I think Commissioner Crispin was next, Madam Chair. I can wait. I have no problem with Eddie going first.
I'll be brief. I think a concern that was voiced by a number of the commissioners was that there have been historical barriers, lack of understanding of the issues related to complainants coming in to express their complaints for police misconduct, whatever it may be. I think we're at a place now, and in the city of Boston, everybody can file a complaint. Everything is investigated. So it's not like back in the old days, if we show, when people came in to file complaints and they were arrested, thrown in prison, thrown in jail in the station, or any number of injustices carried out against them. We're no longer in that world. So if you file a complaint, it will be investigated, and the truth of the complaint will come out. So I think for those who have those concerns, it's important to note, right? I think sometimes we keep thinking about how things used to be, how things were addressed. And I don't know how every police department in the state functions, but I would venture to say that the vast majority of them no longer function in that way because of all the measures that have been put in place to ensure there's some level of accountability at every single department. And I would venture to say some level of transparency also.
Thank you. Commissioner Talley, please. You're muted.
Sorry. This is something that I kind of brought up in the subcommittee in regard to something being substantiated. But yeah, maybe is the language. I mean, if we say verified complaint or confirmed complaint, maybe that'll, go down better. But either way, I think what we're all saying is that once a complaint is received, it'll go through due process. I think we're all on the same page with that, right?
I think you see varying reactions, Commissioner Talley. I think part of it has to do with due process. The understanding of due process varies depending on the individual commissioner. It's an important term which should affect all of our decisions, but I think it's hard to respond to your specific question, just given the different meanings that each of us has with that term. But thank you. Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you, Chair. We're talking about the recertification process. That's what we're talking about. And I'm going to regurgitate some of what Commissioner Crispin and the chief have already said. If a complaint comes in, there's mechanisms within almost every police department in the Commonwealth now. If a complaint comes in, it is investigated. If it's credible, it continues to be investigated. When it's verified or when it's substantiated, as Commissioner Tully has just said, it continues to move forward through the process. We're just talking about recertification here. The chiefs who are responsible, or the body responsible for the recertification at the end of the day, will take into consideration verified, substantiated complaints and the outcome of those complaints. To have a very subjective opinion of whether it's credible or not is completely unfair, especially when it's being made at a level of someone maybe who does not have the expertise in the field that's being studied or the field that we're recertifying on. Picking a simple synonym to take the place of either word, credible or substantiated, will only lead us right back to this same discussion. Substantiated is verified. I agree with Commissioner Tully on that, but again, very strong stance, I know, but it's about fundamental fairness and equal treatment. That's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kazarosian.
I think just quickly again, if we're concerned about the subjective language of credible, I think sustainable or supportable covers both sides. Sustainable is not subjective, supportable is not subjective, but it's not as high as verified, which again cuts off a number of potential complaints and people who are concerned and intimidated by the process. So that's my 2 words suggestions.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone, please.
I think of those 2 suggestions, I would be in favor of the word supportable.
Okay, in the interest of time, I am at this point going to ask the individual commissioners whether they think that we are ready for a vote or whether they think that we should hold this off for an additional period of time. So my question now is simply whether we go forward with a vote, the vote being between the 2 possibilities that have been raised by Pauline and Randy, or whether we should address the broader questions that have been made, comments that have been made about possibilities. Everybody understand what I'm asking at this point? Is that clear? All right. Should we go forward with a vote between substantiated and credible, or should we hold off for further consideration of other terms? Commissioner Bluestone, what do you think?
I would suggest we go forward on a vote, but include the word supportable as an option.
I think, all right, let's just, Commissioner Baker, please. I meant to start with you and I neglected to do so.
I think the conversation has hit its peak, but I think just changing words for the same, you're just changing words around for the same vote. If it's time to vote, it's time to vote. I think both sides have clearly established, guidelines, and but I just think changing words is just semantics here.
Commissioner Calderon, thank you. Commissioner Calderon, do we move to a vote or not?
Yes, move to a vote. Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Crispin.
I'd say move for a vote.
Commissioner Hall.
Yes, move forward.
Commissioner Kazarosian.
Okay, yes, move forward.
Commissioner Luma.
No.
Commissioner Talley.
You were muted, Commissioner.
I'm sorry. Yes, move to a vote.
All right. And I guess I would have been in favor of delaying it, but the majority holds that we should move for a vote. Now, what is the motion before us in terms of what the vote is? What motion?
Madam Chair, I can make the motion if you permit me.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to choose between the 2 words for recertification, credible or substantiated.
Is there a second to that motion?
I will second.
Second.
Any further comment?
Can I
Right.
make a friendly amendment? Can I suggest an amendment?
I would be against it, no.
Okay.
But I would ask for the chair's opinion on whether we should accept the suggestion.
By
Uh,
Robert's rules, oh, sorry, Chair. My
Uh,
apologies.
I think we take a vote, on the two at this point. And then we see if what we end up with. And so it's a vote between substantiated and credible. Right, that's the motion, and there's been a second to that, yes. Commissioner Baker?
Substantiated.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Credible.
Commissioner Calderon?
Substantiated.
Mr. Crispin?
Substantiated.
Commissioner Hall?
Credible.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Credible.
Commissioner Luma?
Credible.
Commissioner Talley?
Substantiated.
And I am in favor of credible. What does that leave us with? Who's been doing the
5 to
arithmetic?
4,
I
credible.
for the
5-4
majority,
credible.
credible have it.
Thank you. So credible has it by a 5 to 4 vote. Thanks to everybody who has participated in this discussion. As Enrique said, there are certainly times when we will not be in agreement. And I think this discussion has demonstrated that, but it has been a fulsome, in my view, discussion. Moving on back to either Pauline or Randy, please.
I can move on to the second policy question. Going to share my screen again. The second policy question before the commission is whether to require an appointing authority to provide a written explanation for a positive attestation, and if so, in which circumstances. The current regulation requires that for positive attestations, the appointing authority provides supporting documentation if the commission requests that. For negative attestations, the appointing authority must make a written report to the commission. A proposal is before you. It's the same proposal from last month and it's in your packet. This proposal requires a positive attestation in 2 circumstances. One, it would require a positive attestation where, since the applicant's last certification, there's been allegation that the applicant engaged in the form of conduct listed in 555 CMR 7.065. I'll put it on your screen. I've put 7.065 on your screen, which lists the categories of misconduct that may be considered even if the applicant has engaged in only a single instance of that misconduct. The second circumstance where the commission might require a positive attestation report is where an applicant has complaints related to the character and fitness standards listed in 7.062B, and the applicant engaged in 2 or more instances of similar or related misconduct, at least one of which occurred since the applicant's last certification. I'll put that one up as well. These are the 10 standards for evaluating character and fitness in the proposed regulations. These must be taken into account as we discussed earlier. And with that, I will stop here and turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Comments, please, from my fellow commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, I know we've discussed this at length, and on this matter, I think we are nowhere near a vote. There is so many different scenarios for this on the that have been discussed. We have not drilled down exactly what this has looked like. The letter that was presented at the last meeting speaks volumes to the admin side of this that we're going to put on police chiefs. I think there needs to be a much greater, robust discussion about this.
Commissioner Baker, and I apologize. I missed the very first thing you said. Could you start again? Did you just what was the beginning of your comment?
At the beginning, I just stated that, you know, we've had discussions about this, and there's so many about how this would be implemented, what it would look like. Maybe it's certain matters. I just think this needs to be more drilled down, more certain. I think we need to take serious considerations to the topics that were brought up about the burden and the admin that you're putting on back onto the police departments for something that we've already submitted to the commission. I just don't feel this is ready for a vote, and there needs to be a much broader discussion. And just from the letter alone that was presented last week sums it up for the you know, your chiefs and commissioners from around the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Bluestone, please.
I just question if there's more consensus on this particular issue, because I think that it's fairly clear that the administrative burden would be tremendous. And I can't really see why it would be justified, although there might be some benefits to it. The administrative burden clearly outweighs any of those benefits, in my opinion.
Thank you. Commissioner Crispin?
Yeah, I think a wholesale positive attestation is unduly burdensome. And I think the other piece of this, we'd find ourselves in a situation where departments are just copying and pasting the positive attestation, right? If we are going to have a positive attestation, it should speak to the specifics of each officer. And if we're just going to put a copy and paste response for the positive attestation, it doesn't do what I think it was intended to do.
Thank you. Other comments? What were you, Pauline, what were you expecting of us today?
So as mentioned last time, the commission has options in terms of how it approaches this issue. So it could do nothing and the regulations would remain the same and we would not require a positive attestation report, or we could, on the other end of the spectrum, we could require a positive attestation in all circumstances. The proposal before you is sort of something in between, providing that if a certain circumstance or standard is met, we would require positive attestation only in those circumstances. I think today I'm open. A discussion as to whether we even want positive attestation reports at this time is one question. And if we did, under which circumstances? It could be what was proposed, it could be another option. And if we're not ready to have that discussion in terms of another option, we can have that discussion another time.
Thank you. Well, given that comment, let me just ask my fellow commissioners, is there any reason why we should not take up whether we want positive attestations? Any reason not to take that up at this point?
I see none. I think under circumstances where there's been some bad behavior, some additional complaints that have come in since the last certification, I think depending on the behavior, we may require positive attestation. But I think in terms of wholesale attestation for every single police officer, you know, we've talked about the administrative burden and the other pieces. For me, I don't want to see copy and paste responses for every police officer.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this issue at this time? If not, let me just ask whether there is any motion from any of the commissioners on this particular issue at this meeting. If so, I would entertain the motion. Is there any motion?
I will. Yeah. I'm sorry, Anya, go ahead.
I would make a motion that we take a vote on whether to endorse positive attestations.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Any further comment? So the motion is whether the post commission should endorse positive attestations. Is that it, Commissioner Bluestone? Is that what you said? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
to
you.
take a vote.
Any further question or comment?
I have a
Yeah.
question.
I'm sorry, who's speaking now? Oh, Commissioner Baker?
Commissioner Crispin was up before me.
Yeah, are we asking for wholesale attestations for every single police officer or under certain circumstances? I just want to make sure I'm clear on what the motion was.
I think the language of the motion, I don't want to put words in Commissioner Bluestone's mouth, was simply whether to endorse positive attestations. I mean, that's it. This is the threshold question, I think. Right, Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes,
So does that answer your question, Commissioner Crispin?
at all.
Not quite.
At all. At this moment, at this point in time, I would be proposing that we question whether to endorse it at all.
I'd be open to vote for that if it was a little bit more specific.
And I'm afraid let me just, if I could, turn to Commissioner Baker, Commissioner Crispin, and see what his response is.
Yes, I have the same question. I'm not really sure. Are we just saying that, is that motion basically to leave things in place and that we're not going to be doing a positive attestation for, every single matter? I'm just a little not unsure of the question.
I think
Of the motion, excuse me, not the question, of the motion.
May I clarify?
yes, please. Thank you.
So in my view, the motion to endorse positive attestations, a yes vote would mean that we are opening up the issue of positive attestations for exploration and then making further decisions about that. A no vote would mean that we are not at this time going to consider positive attestations.
Thank you for that clarification. Does that answer the questions that you had, Commissioner Crispin and Commissioner Baker?
It does for me.
The meaning of the word, of the verb. Okay, Commissioner Kesrosian, did you? Yes, Pauline, please.
In case this is helpful, if I wanted to point something out for clarification. Any changes that are being made are going into a proposed set of regulations. So, for example, if the commission decides to keep the regulations the same and not require positive attestation reports at this moment, we could just leave it in the regulations and it would still go out to the public for public comment. We would still receive feedback in this area. So if the commission, it's just an option. If the commission was in a place where, well, let's hear from the public and get public comment on this, we could leave the regulations as is. We could put in the proposed language. We could put in something else. It would not be in effect as law at that point because we still need to go through the promulgation process. So I just wanted to put the process out there in case it's helpful.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon?
I apologize right up front, but I'm in disagreement with that last statement. I'm under the impression that our organization and commission had taken a vote previously a long time ago that we operate under Robert's rules. And there's a motion on the floor that's been seconded. And that motion is whether we are going to add and entertain positive attestations. And if this commission votes no, it's not open for rediscussion later on to ask anybody else whether or not we want to change the policy moving forward. Once the commissioner votes on that motion, I believe that the motion carries either way.
Let me just comment. The vote originally, Commissioner Calderon, was that we were going to endorse the use of modified Robert's Rules of Order. That's point number one. Point number two, there has been a motion and a clarification of the verb in that motion. I certainly appreciate any member of the staff who adds to the information that we need at the time that we take a vote. I am very grateful for the work the staff has done on this particular issue. Now, I want to come back to the fact that we do have a motion in front of us, and you're right to point that the motion has been seconded, and the motion is, again, I think Commissioner Bluestone, to endorse positive attestation, correct? And there's been a clarification of the meaning of the word endorse. Is there any further question or comment before we take the vote? If so.
Yes, Chair, I would. So am I to understand then, even if we vote no now, it's still open to be discussed again later?
I don't think we can answer that question. I think, what does later mean? I mean,
I'm assuming that I'm misunderstanding, Chair. I'm probably misunderstanding what Pauline just said. I'm under the impression if the commission votes no at this time to change the recertification process to include positive attestations or not, once we say yes or no, that's it. We don't come back and revisit it because maybe we don't like the outcome of the vote. Am I incorrect in that?
I think, let me just hear from Commissioner, from Enrique, and then I may respond if necessary.
Thank you. I think Deputy General Counsel Nguyen was trying to point out that this vote would be to start the process of the draft regulations, which will later get comments. That's where we are. And in other words, you will have another vote to confirm or change anything about this or any part of the regulations based on comments that we have. So you effectively have two votes. One to start, the draft regulations, and that's just the way that the process works. And another one to effectuate them afterwards.
I appreciate that explanation, but it doesn't make sense. If this commission votes no, that we don't want to start that conversation, how are we restarting it later for another vote?
I really think that's a question that would, I'm sorry, our outside counsel has his hand, I think, in the air. Let me, of course, defer to him if I could, please. Attorney Kovich.
But obviously, this is the regulatory process, right? The commission proposes draft regulations. They go out for public comment. It's a period of time. The comments come back. The commission considers those comments and then promulgates final regulations. So as I understand, the question is this: we're all in the process of what draft goes out for public comment. If you say you don't want to consider positive attestations in any way, then the draft stays the same. It goes out for public comment. The comments are what they are, and it comes back, and then the commission has to finally vote to promulgate. So it's not that it's a vote that it's a sort of unfair to put it in the context of we voted and it's over. It's not over. The regulatory promulgation process is not over till after you take public comment and the commission takes a vote finally adopting the regulation. So any vote that's taken as part of the regulatory promulgation process in this stage is really just what's going to be sent up for public comment. It doesn't mean that the commission there could be no comments, there could be lots of comments. The commission could come back and after hearing the comments, do something or do nothing. But it's just part of the process at this time.
I appreciate that, Lon. Mike, and I apologize to my fellow commissioners as well. I'm totally confused on the process of it because I thought that the subcommittee on the recertification that I was part of, that we had already gone out for public comment many times. So I thought that this was a final vote, but I appreciate it. I fully understand. Thank you.
I also thank you. And I think let me then ask, unless there's any further comment, if we could take a vote on Commissioner Bluestone's motion, which has been seconded, and that is, Commissioner Bluestone, am I correct? The wording is whether to endorse positive attestations. Is that it?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker, the vote, please.
Before I vote, I have to say sorry, Chair, because my mind is all over the place. A yes vote would have us changing that chiefs are now going to do positive attestations possibly for every single officer, correct?
No. This is the beginning of a process.
This is perhaps the first, I'm sorry, Commissioner, may I?
Go ahead, please.
This is a threshold motion, Commissioner. A yes vote means you're open to some kind of positive attestation. A negative vote would be you don't want any positive attestation at all.
Would be just keep the way we have things now.
The way we have things are, which is only require negative attestations, reports from negative attestations.
Okay, thank you. I apologize, but thank you.
No apology warranted. Are you in a position now to vote?
Yes, ma'am.
And
no.
Your vote is negative, correct?
Negative, yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Bluestone, it's your motion?
My vote is no.
Commissioner Calderon?
No.
Sorry?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Commissioner Crispin?
I'm confused because Commissioner Bluestone, she said no, but I'm confused as her motion was to open it up for positive attestations. So is a no yes to go forward on positive attestations?
A no is to not endorse at this time the idea of positive attestations and to not make a change.
Okay. I am gonna go yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Hall,
No.
Mr. Kazarojian,
No, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Luma,
No.
Mr. Talley,
No.
and I'm a no as well. So with that, I think we have addressed this particular issue.
Yes.
Pauline, back to you. Is there anything more that we're going to take, or Randy, anything more we're taking up?
I believe that that concludes Deputy General Counsel Nguyen's part of the legal update. Is that right, Pauline?
That's right.
Thank you. And so the next matter relates to the physical fitness and behavioral health of law enforcement officers. And on that matter, I will turn the floor over to Counsel Annie Lee.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, great. So this morning, Lizzie and I will be presenting on physical fitness and behavioral health, which we use interchangeably with the term psychological fitness, as it relates to officer recertification. We plan to present on 4 matters related to this topic. The first being commission law, the second is related law in the Commonwealth, the third is law in other jurisdictions, namely other states, and the fourth is key policy questions for the commission's consideration. And so starting with the commission law. By statute, the commission shall not certify any person as a law enforcement officer unless the commission certifies that the applicant for recertification continues to satisfy the requirements of subsection F. Subsection F refers to the minimum standards for certification, which includes the successful completion of a physical and psychological fitness evaluation approved by the commission. What exactly is that evaluation? That's up to the commission. Among other things, the commission has the power to adopt, amend, or repeal regulations establishing a physical and psychological fitness evaluation pursuant to Section 4 that measures said fitness to ensure officers are able to perform essential duties. So how has the commission undertaken this before? The commission was established in 2021 and completed its first full cycle of recertification earlier this year. So in the past, the commission stated that this standard will be met if the officer successfully completed a physical and psychological fitness evaluation that was required for graduation from an academy or training program, with no limitation or requirement on how recent those evaluations had to be. So under this approach, an evaluation for an officer who's been on the job for 20 years is considered just as valid as an academy evaluation for an officer who's been on the job for 4 years or even 1 or 2 years. And so in other words, the commission's past approach for the first full cycle of recertification was to presume that officers seeking recertification already possess the minimum physical and psychological fitness necessary to be an officer, unless their agency indicates otherwise. And so that presumption came out of an earlier plan that the commission voted on and approved in March 2022 that was entitled Requirements and Plan for Recertification of Certain Law Enforcement Officers. That plan stated that this presumption, this assumption of physical and psychological fitness would only be good for the first recertification cycle. So that is until July 2024. And that was due to the constraints at the time, which was that the commission was established in 2021 and was directed by the legislature to begin recertifying officers A through H, which now we know was about 8,800 officers in 2022. So to sum it up, commission had to certify a lot of officers in not a lot of time. And so this was the solution that was devised. In the meantime, the commission, recognizing that this was just a solution to the time constraints, stated that it would continue developing an evaluation of physical and psychological fitness, and that it would work with the MPTC to explore the development of standards for agency certification that might require certain measures related to physical and psychological fitness. And so this leads me to the next part of the presentation, which is how does this fit into the existing landscape of law on physical and psychological fitness in the Commonwealth? On physical fitness, there's a 1987 law on the books that requires HRD to establish for civil service officers in-service health and physical fitness standards, which are to be rationally related to the duties of these positions and have the purpose of minimizing health and safety risks to the public, fellow workers, and police officers, and that civil service officers shall undergo in-service medical and physical fitness exams no less frequently than once every 4 years. We understand, based on conversations with MPTC and HRD, that HRD meant to set the physical ability test, otherwise known as the PAT, as a standard and exam called for by this statute. The PAT consists of 3 events. It's an obstacle course, a separation event, which means separating one party from another and controlling those individuals. And the third event is a dummy drag. The PAT is currently required of all civil service candidates at the initial hiring stage. And so civil service intended to set the PAT as an ongoing physical fitness requirement. We understand, though, from our conversations with MPTC and HRD, that there was severe pushback to this standard, such that HRD never set the PAT for those in-service requirements. So at the end of the day, there's a statute on the books that on its face sets ongoing physical fitness requirements, but hasn't ever been enforced. So there are effectively no ongoing physical requirements for officers in the Commonwealth. On psychological fitness, there's not much that predates the commission, though the legislature has demonstrated a serious interest in supporting officers' psychological fitness, or what moving forward we're going to be calling behavioral health. And that's to reflect terminology used by mental health professionals and to reduce the stigma associated with the term psychological fitness, which came out of conversations with Commissioner Bluestone. And so in the same police reform bill that created the commission, the legislature called on the MPTC to develop 2 hours of curriculum on mental wellness and suicide prevention to teach law enforcement officers 3 things. First, how to utilize healthy coping skills to manage the stress and trauma of policing. Second, to recognize the symptoms of PTSD within themselves and other officers. And third, to recognize the signs of suicidal behavior within themselves and other officers. The legislature further called on MPTC within the police reform to work with EOPS to promulgate regulations requiring agencies to participate in critical incident stress management and peer support programs to address police officer mental wellness and suicide prevention. And these programs were intended to supplement an existing statute requiring wellness programs for civil service officers, which is that second piece of statute that you see on your screen. And so now I'll turn it over to Lizzie to address the third piece, which is background on what other states are doing about ongoing physical and behavioral health requirements.
Thank you, Annie. So if everyone can hear me okay, I'll get started. Today, I'll just be providing a brief summary on physical fitness and behavioral health requirements from other jurisdictions. All the states discussed today have physical fitness and or behavioral health evaluations mandated by statute. And the following slides will provide examples of these standards and requirements. So the first 2 states that I have on these slides just require physical fitness evaluations. So in New Hampshire, all officers must pass a medical exam and physical fitness test every 3 years throughout their career in order to maintain their certification. Their fitness standards are differentiated by age and gender, and they have charts on their website to show what those standards are. New Hampshire uses the Cooper Institute fitness requirements, and the fitness test consists of a 1.5-mile run, push-ups, and sit-ups. There are opportunities for retesting for officers who do not meet physical fitness standards. But after the retesting, if an officer is still not able to meet these standards, they are placed on a probationary status, which seems to be similar to the Commonwealth's conditionally certified status. And this period can last up to 2 years, after which, if the officer is still unable to meet those standards, the officer's certification is suspended until a medical certification is like passed by a licensed healthcare provider. So Texas has Texas's standards are a little bit different. Agencies have more discretion to develop physical fitness programs and standards. The statute actually requires departments implement a reward policy where officers that meet the physical fitness testing standards are given an amount of administrative leave. It does stipulate that the administrative leave cannot be more than 4 days per year. The Department of Public Safety in Texas actually has examples of physical testing models. The 3 that are listed are combat fitness, rower test, and then the standard physical readiness test, which is the PRT. So combat fitness includes 5 movements that are 1 minute each for every exercise, and 3 rounds with 1 minute in between, 1 minute rest in between. And the movements are like a wall ball throw, sumo deadlift, high pull, box or step jumps, and push press and weighted row. The rower evaluation is a 2,000 meter row for time, a 500 meter row for time, or a 4-minute row for meters. The Texas Department of Justice website says the rowing machine is a good low impact option to estimate a person's VO2 max, which is a scientifically accepted measure of cardiorespiratory fitness. The physical readiness test is pretty standard and what a lot of places use for initial certification, and that includes crunches, push-ups, and a 1.5 mile run within a certain time limit. Texas also includes in their statute a requirement to use the services of a consultant to help develop their fitness standards. So these are just 2 examples of physical fitness standards and evaluations. Next slide, Amy. Okay. So these next states have behavioral health requirements, and I just am comparing what they require. So Connecticut requires a periodic behavioral health assessment not less than once every 5 years. And these are mental wellness checks, which are about 45-minute meetings with a board certified mental health professional with experience diagnosing and treating PTSD. And that is specified in their statute. A final attendance report and participation is available to the officer and agency head upon completion of the wellness check. It doesn't include any information on what was actually discussed. It's merely just to confirm that the officer completed the wellness check. Excuse me. The next state, Missouri, actually recently passed legislation on required mental wellness checks. Their statute is effective as of August 28th of this year, so fairly recently. It requires that all peace officers and first responders shall meet with program service providers once every 3 to 5 years for a mental health check-in. And similar to Connecticut, the program provider shall send notification to the agency or supervisor that the check-in was completed. Next slide, Amy. So in Nevada, regulations were approved in April of this year to expand on the requirement for a behavioral wellness visit. So in Nevada, it's required annually. There is flexibility on the setting and format of the wellness visit. It says that the visits can be done in individual or group setting, in person or virtually. And a mental health professional must not conduct any medical assessment, evaluation, or test to diagnose any mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder. So they specifically say that this is just a check-in. They are not to be evaluating the candidate for any mental disorders. Then, like Connecticut and Missouri, the mental health professional shall provide to the officer and employing agency a letter verifying attendance. And so in that letter, they're required to include the time, place, and date of the wellness visit. Illinois also requires annual screening to evaluate the overall health of the officer and agencies. So screenings should be general and brief, but allow for more detailed questions if certain metrics or things are brought up in the meeting. And then if follow-up is recommended by the mental health professional, agencies can refer the officer to additional resources, and they're encouraged to work with third party to conduct the screenings. They said the role of a third party entity allows for greater confidentiality and trust, and will likely increase the accuracy of responses. Next slide, Annie. Okay, the last state is Maryland, and they actually have both behavioral health and physical fitness requirements. Excuse me, as a condition of certification, a police officer shall submit to a mental health assessment every 2 years and an annual physical agility assessment to establish continuing fitness to carry out the officer's assigned duties. It's the responsibility of the agency to comply with the statutory mandate. So I have a couple examples from different agencies. One department sends officers a link to a questionnaire that they fill out on their own time. There's a unique link for every officer, and they have to complete it within the week that they receive the email. If they fail to complete it, the officer supervisor is notified. Once the officer submits the questionnaire, their responses will be reviewed confidentially by a police psychologist in the department. And if after reviewing their responses, the psychologist determines that the officer is fit to perform their assigned duties, there's no further action taken. But if follow-up is recommended, the psychologist will refer to the officer to an EAP provider that they work with. The referral is strictly confidential, and the psychologist will not inform any person that a referral has been made. Another department in Maryland requires mental health wellness check-ins, so very similar to some of the other states that we looked at. These check-ins are actually offered in partnership with University of Maryland Department of Health Policy and Management. And officers are required to attend a quarterly subsidized therapy appointment with a licensed practitioner. So that could be an option for departments that are, close to schools, and we can look into like building partnerships. So for the physical fitness requirements, the majority of departments have physical agility assessments. So in Maryland, they break out like what the assessments should study. They performed a job task analysis to identify specific job functions and base the test around that. So the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, that, or MPTC for them, is responsible for overseeing the results of the fitness assessment. So the 4 tests are a barrier climb, a weighted drag, sprint, and stairs. So the law enforcement agency is responsible for ensuring officer compliance, and the agency head or designee needs to attest to each certified officer's physical ability to carry out their assigned duties. The MPTC in Maryland is responsible for overseeing agency compliance. So they will audit agencies and make sure that documentation has been submitted attesting to an officer's physical fitness. So some like takeaways and summaries from all of this is a growing number of states have passed legislation mandating mandating periodic mental health visits. A majority of states that require wellness visits have protections in their statute to protect officer confidentiality. Documentation for wellness visits is limited to confirming attendance. It doesn't include notes on anything that was discussed in the appointment. And in terms of physical fitness evaluation, there seems to be a shift towards job-related evaluation as a better indicator of ability to perform job functions. Thank you for your attention on this matter, and Annie and I are available should you have any questions or suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. So finally, I want to turn to the last part of our presentation, which is policy questions for the commission's consideration. Because where does this all leave us? The commission has broad statutory authority to first set physical fitness and behavioral health requirements, and second, determine how it will measure whether an officer is meeting those physical fitness and behavioral health requirements. And as Lizzie just explained, there's no one way to go about either of those tasks. There are really an infinite number of things the commission could decide to do. And so I think before we sort of start kind of going into the nitty-gritty of that, it may be helpful for the commission to first examine some basic policy questions. The first of which is, should the commission continue to allow officers to satisfy physical fitness and behavioral health requirements based on a representation that they previously successfully completed a physical fitness and behavioral health evaluation, regardless of how long ago the evaluation was conducted? So in other words, should the commission continue with the one and done approach it used for the first full cycle of recertification? The second question is, if the commission decides to move away from that past approach, how, if at all, should physical fitness and behavioral health requirements for recertification differ from physical fitness and behavioral health requirements from initial certification? And so, Madam Chair, if it's would be helpful, I can provide a recommendation on both of these questions, but I'm also happy to turn it over for questions and discussion from the commissioners. Please let me know how you would like to proceed.
I would suggest at this point that, Annie, that you provide an opportunity for the commissioners to ask questions or make any comments on the material that you've been provided. But I guess Enrique has had his hands in there. So go ahead, please, Enrique.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to point out one of the comments that came into the chat. It's relevant to the presentation, and I thought worth mentioning that in the case of New Hampshire, that does require a physical fitness test. They do have mandatory retirement, which is not the case for a lot of communities in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Commissioner Talley, please.
For the fitness and health evaluation, I'm kind of curious, has there been a study as to when somebody tested the first time and then the next time they got tested, that there was a vast difference as it relates to their fitness and or health?
Commissioner Talley.
No, Annie, you can go.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure exactly if a study has been done sort of at like 3-year increments, 5-year increments. I will say from the physical fitness and psychological or behavioral health panel that the commission hosted in October, there was a point that the researchers sort of made, which is that officers going into the profession start at a higher than average physical fitness, but then when they leave the profession, they're at lower than average. So there does seem to be some sort of market decline in physical fitness from the start of an officer's career to the end. And that's in part due to sort of the physical aspects of the job, which is that officers are asked to be sedentary for quite a lot of their job, yet asked to do very physically demanding tasks, and it doesn't always even out. And so, you know, Lizzie, if there's anything that you want to add to that, I know that you're a little closer to that research than I am.
Yeah, I mean, my research was mainly focused on what the actual tests are. But I'd be happy to look into that. I think that's a great question and is worth looking into if we do decide to periodically test physical fitness. So thank you for that. And I will be sure to look into that and provide an update when I have that information.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Baker, you were next.
Sorry about that. I have just a couple of questions, and I think I'll have many others as this moves forward. But the communities that you and the states that you listed, who funds these initiatives?
It does vary by state. So there are some that the departments work directly with the town on the budget. There are others where the state actually has funds set aside for evaluations. So it varies by state, and I'd be happy to provide a breakdown of that as well. But it, again, just because there's so much variation across the country, there's different ways of approaching that.
Yeah, I just asked that, and I'm just going to speak to the Commonwealth to what I know. I think we got to be very cautious moving initiatives forward without funding. I'm all for physical fitness. I'm all in for officer wellness, but to move forward with a mandate that has no funding, we're all aware of the Commonwealth's budget, and cities and towns are aware of these initiatives. If I wanted to start this tomorrow, there's no way I could fund it. So I think that's something that's going to be definitely going to be needed to take into consideration before we move forward. And the other is, are these states collective bargaining agreement states? I noticed how you said officers will do this on their own time and things of that matter. Were these things put into their collective bargaining agreements, et cetera?
I have not looked into that, but I can do that research as well.
Okay.
I really just wanted to give examples of, you know, what's out there.
Yeah.
But I can definitely do a more nitty-gritty research into how the implementation process works in these states.
Okay, yeah, I'm, like I said, all for both matters. I just think there's a much bigger picture here that we have to look into before we push things forward on these matters, that we make sure we have funding in place and how this is going to work for everybody. But I appreciate all the work you've done. It's very important, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Crispin, I think you were next.
Yeah, so great points by Commissioner Baker, especially as it relates to the collective bargaining. But I think for those who have been in law enforcement, we know that there's a lower life expectancy for police officers. There was some research done some years ago, I think on average, 10 to 13 years life expectancy. And a lot of that is due to all the stresses of the job. This is a great initiative for us to take on. I think I've seen firsthand there are recruits who work incredibly hard to make it through the physical training part of the academy, and then a year out, they just totally stop, and you can see huge gains in weight, self-care, etc. Right. So I think this is something we need to address. How we address it is going to be the bigger part, right? Like in terms of how a department's going to take this on, what are going to be the incentives, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this is something we absolutely need to address, because I've seen people over the years, and I think this is not something that we're going to take on, but we probably need to take a look at the mandatory retirement age of 65 for police officers. There are very few people at 65 who can take on the mandates of the job if you are really doing the police work, right? So I think while we may not be able to address that, I think this piece of addressing health and wellness of police officers is absolutely crucial, not just the physical aspect, but the mental health well-being of police officers.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make 2 points. The first is just to clarify that that the commission never formally adopted the quote one and done concept for evaluations. What we did was set an initial bar to give us time to better understand the variability of the standards across the Commonwealth. And I think we always recognized that we would be coming back to this discussion once we had more information. And then secondly, I just want to speak a little bit to the issue of behavioral health or wellness, and just highlight the fact that the overarching concept in other states and also here in the Commonwealth has been that any kind of wellness or behavioral health program should be participation-based, that it's really critical that it be confidential. And that there's definitely benefits that are, I think, at this point, well documented to face-to-face contact with providers or clinicians that are culturally competent in understanding the specific behavioral health issues related to law enforcement. And that we've seen that there is a tremendous amount of benefit to just the cross-fertilization that happens between mental health professionals and law enforcement officers when we embed clinicians into different systems. So for instance, in our court clinics throughout the Commonwealth, we have highly trained forensic mental health professionals, psychologists and social workers and other mental health professionals who are there to help the court with mental health evaluations, but are also there as a resource to law enforcement, to judges, to lawyers, and that's proved to be very successful, as well as the co-responder programs that we have, where we, again, pair law enforcement with mental health professionals. And it's both a benefit in terms of going out on mental health calls, but also an opportunity for law enforcement officers to establish relationships with therapists that have also proved very beneficial. And then, of course, in the Commonwealth, we have a very well-established network of peer support professionals. And again, that system has been highly effective. And I think as we go forward in this conversation, I just want to make sure that we're aware of the resources that we already have, and that we're thinking about how to expand and build upon the systems that have already worked well in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners at this point? If not, I think, Annie, did you say you had a couple of additional points you wanted to make?
Those were sort of recommendations for the specific policy questions, but that was really for the purposes of kind of kickstarting the commission's conversation. It seems the commission has been ready to sort of have this conversation absent those recommendations. So I can sort of hold on those recommendations, though I will note they're included in the cover memo that has been included in the commissioner's packets, should they like to review them. If it's helpful at all, though, or at least I think it would be helpful for my purposes to take a temperature essentially on what Commissioner Bluestone identified as sort of the first question, which is sort of setting the bar, or kind of taking a position on what the requirement should be going forward, which is whether to keep the sort of approach that is currently codified in regulation, which is allowing officers to satisfy physical fitness and behavioral health evaluation based on a representation that they previously completed an evaluation, or whether the commission would like us to explore and provide further recommendations or information about what a future evaluation could look like that is different from the commission's prior approach.
Enrique.
I actually think that Commissioner Bluestone answered that question, Annie, based on the discussion from before. Perhaps the question really is how the rest of the commissioners may feel about that, and whether you're ready to chime in right now or at a later time. It's really up to you.
Thank you, Enrique. And that was what I meant was, Commissioner Bluestone sort of provided her opinion, and it'd be helpful to hear from the rest of the commissioners, their thoughts on whether or not to, or whether they, what their thoughts are about how to approach this evaluation requirement moving forward.
I don't want to speak for anybody but myself, but it seems to me, Annie, that we do need some additional answers to the questions that have been raised by the commissioners before at least I would make that decision. I think very, very important questions and comments have been stated. And so I'd simply like to get some answers to those questions, either from you or you and Lizzie, unless there's anybody who feels differently at this point. Just as an illustration, again, speaking personally, I think Commissioner Baker's comments about the funding issue seems to me to be very critical.
Yes, and that's something in our discussions with MPTC that we've been, very cognizant about. As you'll see in the cover memo that's included in your packet, there are some sort of suggestions about how we could be creative to sort of make sure that we're setting meaningful requirements or standards for physical fitness and behavioral health without running into sort of an unfunded mandate problem. And so some of the ideas that we put forward is, requiring an annual physical, which would be covered as preventative care through health insurance. Other parts of it are sort of leveraging the MPTC 2-hour training on wellness to essentially ensure that officers are educated about behavioral health. And the sort of impacts or what it means for them essentially. And so these are definitely things that we're keeping in mind. We can certainly come back to the commission at a later time with some of the answers to the questions that have been posed by the commission for further discussion. And I will also note that last month we mentioned that there was a survey that was deployed to agency chiefs about physical fitness and behavioral health for them to help us identify how physical fitness and behavioral health are currently approached by agencies and sort of what assistance or support that they see that they think would be beneficial going forward and what these requirements and evaluations might look like going forward. And so we can also present that information in a future meeting. I will say that we have sent this survey out to agency chiefs, and we also plan to send it out to the labor unions to also get the rank and file perspective on what physical health and behavioral health requirements should look like moving forward.
Thank you. And thank everybody for the presentations and the quality of the presentations, which I think have been enormously thought-provoking. With that, can I turn back to you, Randy?
Yes, we will not be presenting on an agenda item regarding the agency certification initiative today, and namely that item concerned the discussion of a standard regarding an officer code of conduct. We do expect to discuss that matter at a future meeting. And I just want to thank and commend Pauline, Nguyen, Annie Lee, and Lizzie Smith on their very thorough and thoughtful work on the matters that they've discussed with you today. So that concludes, unless there are any other comments or questions, that concludes the legal update.
And let me second the appreciation that you've just expressed for those who have worked on the matters. Also, thank you, Randy, for your coordination of those matters. And I think with that, the next item on the agenda is whether there are any matters not anticipated by me as chair at the time of posting. To my knowledge, there are not. And with that, I think we will be moving into executive session in accordance with Chapter 30A, Section 21A1, to discuss the discipline or dismissal of complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, or individual. The same statute, section 21A5, to discuss the investigation of charges of criminal misconduct. The same statute, 21A7, combined with chapter 60, section 8C2 of the general laws, and to the extent that they may be applicable, general laws, chapter 6, sections 168 and 178, to discuss the initiation of preliminary inquiries and initial staff review related to the same and regarding certain criminal offender record information, and chapter 30A, section 21A7, combined with sections 22F and G of the same statute, to discuss and approve the minutes of prior executive sessions, and chapter 30A, section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation in the matter of the case, consolidated cases pending in Suffolk County Superior Court, as an open meeting might have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the commission. And I think with that, is there anything further that we should address at this time? We will not be reconvening in the public meeting. Anything further, Enrique or Randy, that we should be addressing at this point? Or any procedural matter we should be addressing?
Just that you take the vote, Madam Chair, to go into executive session.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker? Lester, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon?
Yes.
Commissioner Crispin?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Gazarojian?
Yes.
Mr. Luma?
Yes.
Mr. Talley?
Yes.
I'm also affirmative, so that's unanimously carried. Enrique, do you want to just explain to members of the public if they have any questions about any of the matters that we've addressed, how they can deal with the commission on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As usual, our website, mapostcommission.gov, has all the contact information for a variety of ways to get in contact with us. So, and also questions in the panel, in the Q&A portion that we take, and we'll reply as needed.
Thank you very much. Let me again thank all the members of the staff who have worked on the matters that we've addressed today. Thank the members of the public who have been in attendance for their attention to the work of the Post Commission. We as commissioners are very grateful for both. I think with that, commissioners, we will take a 5-minute break before we reconvene. There is Jamie, there's a new Zoom number, correct, for the executive session?
I resent it, so it should be in your inbox.
Thank you very much. So a 5-minute break, commissioners, and we reconvene at that point. And thank you.